Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment. We have Ben is here to visit us today, and I'm going to let Ben introduce himself. But as we do here in Threads, we have Ben introduce, and then we are going to go back and talk to him and learn the principles that he used to get to where he is today. And maybe you and I can learn from them so that will become better human spirits. Ben, welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, just chatting about the flow of life, how sometimes things can take us off course, so it would
Yep.
seem, but how when we kind of change our perspective or perhaps change our timeline, we can see that maybe everything is really putting us on course. So I can give you a brief introduction to kind of my story and what I'm up to now, if you like.
Yeah. Just tell the people what you're doing today. I know I'm going to go into your story because I think it's a fascinating piece of your life that you're going to share with us. And I want people to learn that it doesn't matter where you think you are and what's going on in your life, there is always a way out. And so just give us some information as to what you're doing today. Give us all the good stuff, man, because keep telling people, the story that you hear Ben is going to about to say sounds really nice, but we need to know what happened to cause this beautiful story in front of us. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so I'll start with the present day, and then afterwards we can kind of see what led up to there. But
Yeah.
at the moment, yeah, I have a company called Reorigin, and I'm working to help people to essentially rewire their brains using neuroplasticity. This sounds sometimes a little bit complicated or funny to say, but at the end of the day, it's actually quite simple. It's really a process of changing your thoughts, which result in a change of feelings, which results in a change of biochemistry, which can result in a change in health. And this is something that's very close to my own heart. I've been fascinated with how people can change on all levels, starting way back when. And I don't know if you want me to go into my history a little bit now, or
No, just let us just talk. Whatever you feel, however you're led to go. That's how
okay,
we go. Don't worry about it.
sure, all right. So yeah, as I was saying, I've always been fascinated by this concept of change and how we can help ourselves to evolve and what that even really means at the end of the day. Um, and it started at a very young age when I was kind of a scrawny kid in high school and found that I could change my physical body, my appearance, my form and function, so to speak, by exercising, and just became kind of enthralled with this notion that you could go from having an idea in your head, like I'm going to get stronger, and then you could actually do a certain action and perform
Mhm.
something over and over, and this would result in change of your, in a way, your destiny, your genetic programming, your genetic expression, and of course your physical, body and muscularity. So that became a real fascination of mine. I ended up going into health and fitness and training athletes and helping people recover as a corrective exercise specialist after college. And I was really starting to put myself out there in this field of health and wellness. And then all of a sudden, around age 25, something very curious happened, which is that I completely lost my health, happened very quickly. And
Oh.
I had been traveling and surfing, which is an activity that I loved, and had picked up some parasites in different parts of the world, was in Southeast Asia and West Africa as well. But when I came back and started seeing the doctors and was treated for parasites and also treated for Lyme disease and a few other things, which is a common occurrence here in Long Island, where I'm from,
Mhm.
the interesting thing is that my health continued to decline. And for about 3 years, I was bedbound and just seeing one doctor after the other, trying to change these circumstances. And it wasn't until I started to realize that there was this sort of wiring mechanism taking place in my, not just my brain, but in my body, that was like a hypervigilance
Mhm.
that was producing a ton of tension and inflammation, that it was in that state almost impossible, or perhaps actually impossible, to move forward and to change. And the kind of realization I came to, which was not an intellectual realization, it was more of a body internal knowing, was
Mhm.
that unless I somehow let go, which is the most counterintuitive thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
unless I somehow kind of let go of resisting or stop trying through brute force to get
Mm-hmm.
myself better. This is just going to continue and get worse. And so I ended up giving this short TED talk about 5 years ago, in which the title of the talk is "One Deep Breath," because it was really this sort of pivotal moment for me when I found myself in my sort of lowest, weakest condition. Just to give you a sense of what was actually going on, I had multiple brain lesions in the prefrontal cortex. So I had brain fog, signs of dementia at age 25. I had arthritis. I was unable to walk more than the length of half a city block without needing to rest for days on end. Um,
Wow.
I had food allergies, sensitivities to light, sound, severe insomnia, you name it. It was just a very difficult time all around.
Wow.
And more than that, it was just migratory pain and inflammation in the body. And the most troubling thing was that there was no apparent cause for this.
Mm-hmm.
One doctor to the next, they really had no way to link up these different specific symptoms to uh, any causative factor in the environment. So even to have a diagnosis like Lyme disease, or even got a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, these different things are really just sort of labels that describe the condition. So chronic fatigue syndrome, another label that I was given, is really just a name that says tired all the time, which,
Yeah.
it's like, I could have told you that. I once heard a friend say, I went to the doctor with a pain in my knee and I got diagnosed with knee pain. And it was sort of, sort of funny, but that's actually, when you talk about like chronic fatigue or Lyme disease, it's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So the main point is that I came to this realization that it wasn't any one thing that was causing this. And as a result, my thinking started to change, that it's not going to be any one thing that gets me
Mm-hmm.
out of this. So really what's, you could say, causing this is a total condition that's set up
Mm-hmm.
for my body, that's responsible for my brain and body reacting to the environment, to pathogens, to anything else in the way that it is. And so I became really fascinated with trying to understand my brain and body's reactions. Now, why is it reacting in this way? Why is
Right.
it that other people can eat certain foods, but when I eat them, I get severe reactions? Why is it that many people in the Northeast get bit by ticks and get the Lyme bacteria, but only roughly less than 2% actually get really sick from it? So there's a lot more than just what happens. There's also how and why our body responds to what happens.
Yeah.
And therein lies the sort of pivot point. And in that uh, sort of moment of realization, and what I described and became the title of this talk, this one deep breath that I took, I realized that I could actually pause for just
Mm-hmm.
a moment.
Yep.
I could pause in the midst of this storm, this chaos that it
Yeah.
seemed like I was stuck in. And in that pause, I had the freedom to
Mm-hmm.
choose, to perhaps choose a different way of responding. And that could be in the most subtle form.
Yep.
Rather than respond with muscle tension, with
Yeah.
grit, with fortitude, with trying to force my way through it, the way we're very much trained in today's society, perhaps I could respond with relaxation,
Mm-hmm.
with that deep breath, with exhalation, with muscle release. And as I started to practice this response over and over again, I actually started to realize that I had a little bit more energy. My body started physically healing.
Mm-hmm.
Inflammation was calming down. And as I started going back to the doctor, it started with just a deep breath. People always want to know exactly what it was I did, and we can certainly get into that more.
Yeah.
But it ultimately, came to retraining myself to relax and to self heal. And I really do believe that the natural state of the human being is health and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
It's only when things happen that can take us off course that we start to experience anything other than this state of homeostasis. That's called a non-homeostatic response. But if left to its own devices, or if supported to return to that state, then health, homeostasis, happiness, joy, all of these natural states will return. So there we can take it from there.
Wow. Um, Ben, you have explained um, threads of enlightenment. You have explained if people were paying attention, you were explaining how to get out of any situation. And I love your story because um, you had your training. I love how life is. You know, life takes all of our trainings, all of our little things. People ask, they have like little crazy jobs and here and there and whatever. And sometimes they want to know, how am I ever going to use this skill? And later on in life, something happens and you go, wow, I did this in this particular place and I'm able to do this as a result. And so you were talking about several principles in your story, the mental adjustment. When you talk about it is everything starts in a thought. Everything starts there. And that is where it is planted, and that thought is planted, and it's watered by your focus. And you talked about shifting your focus. So once that thought comes, Ben talks about how he's looking at his situation. There's so much, Ben, that you'd mentioned in there that I'm so excited about just getting deeper into. But it's that thought. It starts with the thought and controlling our thought. I remember reading a book that says we are godlike in this fashion, that we are able to control our thoughts. Because once we've controlled our thoughts, we will control our behavior. And uh, you had talked about that breath. And the breath, I describe it as it is the bridge between the madness and the peace. And once you get and you begin to learn this principle and you begin to take those breaths, the breath brings you the power to decide. And you had even talked about all of these things, Ben, and I want you to go back in there. And because there's so much, we need to untangle the wisdom that you have just laid out in there in your presentation about your past. And let's talk about first the thought life, because this is where it begins, whether you begin to come out of your situation or whether you stay in your situation. That power of the thought, because once you've gained control of that through the breath, you would then have gained the ability to make a single decision. And Ben talks about that. Um, Give us a little more information. I know, Ben, you had some experience of that previously when you were looking at how you were able to train your body. We began to train, and I call what you talk about when you begin to, I call it condition response. And so we train our body, our thoughts, our minds, and all these things um, so that we can respond a certain way. I give the example of if you and I are in a car and we're just driving, minding our business, and we're not doing anything crazy, but we look up and there's a cop car. We have been programmed. We are going to hit that brake out of sheer condition response, and it's automatic. Martial arts, I study martial arts. The training is the same thing. So let's go back, Ben, and talk about the mind and the thought and the playground of the mind. And let's provide from your experience some of the tools that you can utilize in your situation. One of them is the breath. Talk to us about the thoughts and how to become masters of our thought.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great to hear that you do martial arts. I myself am a longtime practitioner of a lot of different types of martial arts, but they really teach us, like you said, you use that kind of terminology, conditioned response.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything in life is a matter of conditioning.
Yes.
And most of the time, for most of us, for most of our lives, this conditioning is taking place subconsciously and without
Mm-hmm.
our permission, right? It's
Yes.
happening in virtue of our exposures, our experiences, even our genetics to some extent can be conditioned to express themselves in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing is that nothing in life is static, nothing is fixed. Everything is in a constant state of flux. Famous saying is that change is the only constant.
Mm-hmm.
So, what determines the direction into which a transformation proceeds, whether it's in the direction of regeneration or degeneration, expansion or contraction, is ultimately guided by our thoughts, because that determines our mental, physical, psychological, spiritual, you could say, and physiological response in any given
Mm-hmm.
moment. So getting back to this idea of conditioning and the subconscious notion of it, oftentimes our thoughts will default to a certain story, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if, let's say, I was going along in my 20s, everything was fine, and then I got sick, the story is, this is a nightmare,
Yeah.
and that's what was going through my head. It was my worst fear, as
uh,
someone who was an athlete and a trainer and made his living and built his reputation and sense of identity on health and being healthy.
yeah.
The worst fear that I had
Mm-hmm.
was, losing my health. And that's exactly what happened. It's interesting, I'll just say as a side note, how life, I think, gives us sometimes these challenges, sometimes gives
Yes.
us our biggest fear, gives us our
Yes.
biggest challenge,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can learn how powerful we are and how
Yeah.
we can not just have the power to change that. Later, I learned, of course, we can do that, and that's great. But also the power to accept things as they are, because that's really the first step. The
Mm-hmm.
next step, you could say, is knowing and believing that we can change it, and then you could say a step from there is actually learning how and doing
Yeah.
it. So this story and the thoughts that came from this notion of I'm in a nightmare, I learned later on when I was studying the brain and neuroplasticity that those types of stories actually produce a ton of cortisol, adrenaline,
Mm-hmm.
norepinephrine in the system, which are, of course, stress hormones, which are
Yeah.
pro inflammatory, which lead to degeneration of tissue, which shut
Yeah.
down detoxification pathways, which, if you're into bioelectricity or biophysics, they can
Yep.
also shut down the chakra system. So, depending how you look at it, they basically have a wide range of deleterious effects to the nervous system. And the more I woke up, and every day when I would wake up and realize, okay, I still can't really walk today, I still have this pain today, I'm still stuck in this nightmare, the more I was perpetuating the inflammation that, well, perhaps didn't initially cause the condition, it was absolutely now contributing to keeping
Contribute.
it
Yes.
in place and preventing me from healing, right? Preventing, like we said, the body from doing what it naturally does, which is to
Mm-hmm.
heal. And
Heal.
we know that it naturally heals because if you've ever gotten a paper cut and that paper cut is now gone, that's just proof that your body heals itself. You didn't
Yes.
do that. It did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, you're a martial artist. So, Bruce Lee, he says, when it comes to, punching, he says, I don't hit, it
Yeah.
hits, right?
Mm-hmm.
His whole philosophy of
Yes.
training and conditioned responses was to condition himself to the point where the conditioning recedes to the background. And
Yes.
now his consciousness is just moving through his nervous system, moving him according to whatever the environment
Whatever
calls
situation.
for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
Exactly.
I love this because you'd mentioned, and I want the people to get an understanding of this process. Your thought now produces chemical response within your body. It produces it first. The Because I study electrical engineers, electrical engineer. The brain now is, if you see a brain of that it's operating, it's like an electric field, just shooting back and forth with the synapses receiving the energy as it comes back and forth. And so the thought comes, it starts to cause this electric field in your brain to become active, and which causes your body now to respond. So as you become fearful, your brain begins to activate, and it responds. Your body responds through all kinds of different ways. Ben mentioned some of them: arthritis. You have stress. You have all the other things now. As you lost control of your thought, that your mind is now picked up and now has to manifest someplace, and it's going to show up in your body. It's going to show up in your life, in your habits. It's going to show up, and unless you begin to, as you had said, and I keep telling people about this, that enlightenment for me, in my mind, is that when you begin to ask these questions, self questioning, as you begin to ask those questions while you're laid up facing all of these challenges that are coming to you. And I wanted to mention that Ben had so many challenges coming to him all at the same time. And all he did to begin to start the process by which he can now move from laying in bed to begin walking and so forth was a breath. He took a breath and he now began to make powerful choices that were different from what he was looking at laying in the bed. He began to look at other roads, he now has to chart a new path in his brain. And that's what we were talking about, conditioning this brain of yours. You began to bring your thoughts, create that picture, visualization. All of these things are a part of growth and self-development. These are tools that we have to utilize in order for us to move from A to B. And as you now, Ben, you're beginning to hear what the doctors are saying. I tell people sometimes you just have to tune those guys out. You're hearing what they're saying, and a lot of their language is contrary to what you want. So, how did you now begin to put their opinion, their diagnosis aside, and begin to take your diagnosis or your desired diagnosis and move from the bed to turning a little and making that 1, 2, 3 steps?
So one of the things I was really wrestling with at this time was this notion of patience versus acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Because to your point, some of the doctors I saw had given me a basically life sentence. They compared me to other, with things like multiple sclerosis. They said, this is kind of the way it goes, or degeneration is going to just continue from here. In other optimistic cases with Lyme disease, they would say, okay, we're not really, let's shift our perspective and hope that by the time you're 50, you can return to a normal semblance of a normal life. And so I was wrestling with this notion of, patience versus acceptance, where I thought that if I was patient, that meant that, okay, maybe somewhere down the line, I can cling to this idea of getting better. And I thought that if I accepted my current state, that meant that it was like giving up. It was
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't understand at the time this concept of acceptance or surrender as
Yeah.
being compatible with patience, of being compatible with the notion of still keeping your eye on where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it just meant, okay, accept where you are. It was in that moment of, kind of horrifying realization that where I was going, according to, the doctors, was not any place positive,
Yeah.
that I took that breath. And in that moment, I like I said before, I realized that I was free, just
Mm-hmm.
free in that moment. Later on, I would learn about, people like Viktor Frankl, who was a famous psychologist, who said that between stimulus and response, there's a space.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space lies our freedom to choose.
Yes.
And Frankl, of course, is, very famous for saying that human beings' last human freedom, or our biggest human freedom, perhaps our only freedom, is that freedom to choose our own
Yes.
way and to choose our own attitude in any given situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned, the one thing that I could change was my thoughts in that space. The
Yeah.
breath would be the inroad into the space,
Mm-hmm.
and then the shift would be my thoughts. And it started with that story. That story I had been telling myself, this is a nightmare that I'm waking up into. What if I could shift that into
Yes.
something different? This is an exploration into a
Mm-hmm.
new part of life. This is an adventure
Yeah.
into something different. And by shifting that, I started to notice very, very clearly and immediately changes in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would dissipate as, of course, you get
Yeah.
triggered and you
Yeah.
get back into
Mm-hmm.
your old condition
Yes.
responses. But the more I practiced this and practiced the new condition response of telling myself and feeding my brain these new thoughts, that this is an exploration, this is a journey, this
Mm-hmm.
is not, a definitive end, the more I started to have a little bit of more energy. And then later, as I was studying the brain and neuroscience, I realized that what was going on here was that simply by shifting the thoughts that we're talking about, by shifting that story, I was transitioning my biochemistry from that uh, adrenaline cortisol state to dopamine,
Yep.
oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins,
Hmm.
which are essentially the antithesis of that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting thing, phenomenon that takes place, which is called reciprocal inhibition. And this basically means, fancy term, but essentially it's really simple. It basically means that your biology and your brain can't be in two juxtaposed states at the same time.
Hmm.
The same way that you can't be writing with your right hand and
Yeah.
doing something else with your right hand at the same time. So when you're in these thoughts, if you put yourself in these states of hope, optimism, adventure, questioning what's next around the corner, excuse me, and approaching it from this new place, and then even taking it a step further and using visualization to see
Hmm.
yourself healthy,
Yes. Yes.
to see yourself living an adventure, doing something interesting, something that you care about, that brings you joy, then your brain starts to produce these neurochemicals, these endorphins, this oxytocin, these different chemicals
Yeah.
that actually inhibit the production of the cortisol and the epinephrine. So, of course, it starts to have this very real physical and immediate response within the system.
Hmm.
And then it only makes sense from there that if this trend continues, if you continue to flood your system with positive endorphins, with these anti-inflammatory chemicals, and that stops the production of inflammatory cytokines, that stops these vicious cycles from taking place, then your body can resume that natural healing function
Yeah.
the same way it healed the paper cut. Essentially, for me, just to let the listeners know, now more than 10 years later, I'm 100% healthy and have been for many years. But essentially, by learning to do this in different ways and doing it repeatedly exercising my freedom to choose where
Hmm.
my own thoughts go and the
Yeah.
resulting biochemistry that follows, those not just arthritis healed and pain sensations and old neurons that were misfiring healed, but so did some physical problems like these brain lesions I had that are said to not heal. Those actually
Wow.
did heal. Of course, all the biochemistry when I went back to the doctor, testosterone levels recovered. C-reactive protein
Yeah.
reduced,
Yeah.
all of these different biomarkers that doctors look at to say you're healthy or not healthy,
Hmm.
completely resume their natural healthy function. And so, of course, then everything in the body returned to normal. And that was a real uh, powerful kind of realization for me that this stuff really works, that we are far more powerful than we often give ourselves credit for, and that it's not something that is even that necessarily difficult. It doesn't involve the mechanism of exertion. It
Yeah.
actually simply involves the mechanism of letting go and directing our awareness to where we
Hmm.
want it to be.
Yeah. I absolutely have. Um, a couple of my friends, she says that perspective is everything. I have a friend of mine. She says perspective is everything, and you talk about shifting that just a little. And I tell people it's just a little. And it's not much. If you look into your situation and you make that adjustment, it is just a slight switch. Your choice of what you want to look at. You want to look at what the doctors are saying? You want to look at the pain that you're having, or do you want to look at something else? And so it's a slight shift, but that shifting gives you the power to move. And the human brain, we only use a small percentage of it. Yet that's why I have been focusing on the power of the brain and the thought right here. I kept him here for a purpose. We are just using a small percentage of the brain. And yet, I wanted the people to hear what Ben was able to accomplish by using such a small percentage of the brain that they tell us that we use, Ben, compared to the full 100% of our brain. And yet, with that amount, you were able to move from where you are to where you are today. And you mentioned that how powerful we are. And so I try to, my hope is that people don't allow the emotions that you have created through your thoughts to keep you locked in. Those emotions are depression. Those things are fearfulness, anxiety. All of these things manifested from your thought, because I bet you started thinking, oh, I don't have enough money for this, I don't have that. Then it forms in your brain. It now trickles into your body, and you're worried about money, and your intestinal system is all crunched up and messed up because you have brought that process through, and now it affects you. And I wanted Ben to spend some time, and I thank you, Ben, for spending the time and just allowing me to keep you here to show the people the importance of what you are talking about, the power of the brain and rewiring that system to get us to obtain what we wanted, and all the other tools that you utilize. I told people, my background, Ben, is Christianity. I was brought up in the church, and I remember reading the scripture. It talks about Jesus was hanging on the cross, and the reason why he stayed there, it says in the Bible, was that he visualized the people being the people that would be born again or rescued. That's what kept him there. He used visualization, the same thing you and I talk about. And if we can get a handle of these things that Ben has been talking about, I promise you, whatever situation you're in, it will change and you will come out of it. There's another scripture. It says, Job, the story of Job. I know many of you have heard this. Job said, the thing that I feared has come upon me. And what does that teach us? It teaches that the power of his mind. Ben talked about the fear of being unhealthy manifest, and so we pull these things into our space, good things and bad things. But it's he said, the thing that I feared. And so the thing that you want, what is it do you want? Focus on those things, as Ben was talking about. What is it do you want? Call those things by rewiring your thought life, because as you rewire those things, I promise you, and I know Ben would agree with me, it will change. And a lot of people get frustrated with themselves. Ben, I want you to talk about that, because a lot of people lose it right there. They are expecting this thing to manifest. I've been doing it 2 days now, 3 days a week, and some things are instantaneous, but change. My mom always said, change is beneficial. And so, what is it you want? You have to be tenacious about it, because if you want it that bad, the time doesn't matter. And so, the manifestation of what you want matters, not the time. And I want you to talk about that time, Ben, because a lot of people lose it right here.
Yeah, really good point. So I think that frustration that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, one really healthy way that we can look at that frustration is to see it for what it is, which is also a conditioned response.
Yeah.
We're conditioned to become frustrated when we don't get what we think we want or what we may actually, in fact, want.
Mm-hmm.
The key is to start shifting our focus from the end result to the process of getting there,
Mm-hmm.
to realize that, in a way, if you can drop in to the moment, if you can immerse yourself through a breath, through taking that pause, through visualization, that you have, in fact, in that moment already arrived, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
this thing in psychology called the arrival fallacy,
Yeah.
meaning sort of like the grass is always greener on the other side, or we always
Mm-hmm.
look to a certain point thinking, when I've arrived at this point, when I get my health back, or when I
Yeah.
get the bonus, or fulfill the career goal, whatever it might be, then I will experience that state of homeostasis, of peace internally and externally. And of course, it's a fallacy for a reason, because it never comes if we perpetually keep that over the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
The key is, like you said, and what I always tell people now is, the biggest change for me happened when I stopped fighting against my condition and
Yes.
started living in the solution, started
Yes.
immersing myself in the solution. As soon as I immersed myself in the possibility that the brain can change and the body can change, immediately I would start to relax, because all of a sudden it became irrelevant to me how long it would take. I was already on the course. That's
Hmm.
all that mattered.
Yes.
And we're
Hmm.
always on the course. I'll give people a little hint here, or secret. The course never ends. The path
No.
never ends.
No.
Even if you get back to what the biomarkers would say is healthy, or the doctors would say
Hmm.
is disease free, there's always some other places that you want to get to. The only thing that matters is whether or not you are on the road and embracing that process. So for me, it was, like I mentioned, this first rule of defensive driving. This is, I think, one of the most simple, elegant ways to put it, is to never look at what you're trying to avoid, to simply keep your eyes focused on the
Hmm.
horizon, on where you're going, and drop into the journey. And in
Yes.
doing so, the brain, the body will start to produce the necessary and requisite neurochemistry, hormones, to not just optimize your body for healthy function, but optimize your brain, your mind, your intellect for searching out new answers, finding new solutions. So that's certainly what happened in my case. Is as soon as I realized that I was already in a sense, or I could be already where I wanted to be by dropping in, my mind all of a sudden became so available, rather
Hmm.
than focusing on all of those old medical reports and diagnoses and trying to fight against the condition that I didn't even realize was taking up so much time and energy and brain resources. All of a sudden, now my brain was free to
Yeah.
explore these new possibilities, to explore neuroplasticity, to explore, biochemistry, neuroscience, all of these things that now actually confirm that, yes, in fact, health, homeostasis are the natural state. This is the place you'll return to when you stop fighting against the opposite. And this is the place that we can simply condition ourselves back to. And, now to your point with reorigin, there's a great saying in from Zen Buddhism, which is that, being mindful is actually easy. It's remembering to be mindful that's difficult. So I really wanted to try and give people a set of tools and sort of a protocol, a little process that they can use to snap themselves back into that place of not just mindfulness, but of actively conditioning their thoughts. So that's really what we do with Reorigin, is we give people this tool set, this process through this neuroscience program to learn how to retrain their brain in real time. It's something that they can actually practice just 3 times a day for 10 minutes, and then
Hmm.
practice on the fly whenever they've found themselves stuck in these negative loops, to start to recondition the brain. And the beauty of it is that the beauty of conditioning is that the effects can be permanent,
Yeah.
because we're
Hmm.
essentially undoing the root cause of the problem. So Einstein put it the best. I think he said it's not about finding the solution, but undoing the basis of the problem.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So when we start to
Yes.
really recondition that neural wiring, we no longer have to work so hard to not be frustrated or to be positive, because that becomes your new default state.
Yes, and this is the beautiful thing about it. This is the life journey that we are constantly on, and to learn how to reprogram our minds and our thoughts. Uh, Ben, I'm going to make sure that everyone gets to you, because what you are all about is exactly what I believe in, how we process and move from one space to the other and become victorious in our life. It's not an easy thing, but it is a rewarding thing. It is a beautiful thing. You learn about yourself. There's no such journey like learning about who you truly are, and learning the fact that there is no limitation within you at all. Jesus makes a statement. He says, "All things are possible to the man who believes," and that principle is perfect for everything. Whatever you believe will become truth, because that's just a principle that will always happen. And so work on your thoughts, because I had Ben spend his time here on this, because to me, it is the key. Those breath that he talked about, I was able to learn how to do that through meditation. Until I learned how to meditate, my life was chaotic. It brought me control. I controlled my day before I got up and went to work. I controlled the entire day once I got into my meditation, and I set my day there. And when you have other issues that came up that wasn't a part of my meditation, it wasn't allowed in my space to cause me to have my thoughts go awry and go all over the place. I was able to take that information and go, okay, and put it where it belonged, right in front of me, and I will deal with that in time. My staff would come to me about situation, and the pressure, they're like, oh, this, and that, and I'm like, and they would give it to me, and then I would say, okay, I'll get right back to you, and there would be all panic on their face, and they learned that anytime they gave that information to me, I needed the time now to process this new thing that has come before me. How am I going to handle it? What are my choices? Not from a place of busyness and worry and all of this stuff, from another place. And so sometimes I would go and hide in another part of the building just to get my thoughts together and process this. And so I'm so glad, Ben, that you came to us. I'm so honored to have you presenting yourself here, because I believe this particular aspect needs to be dealt with. And I kept you there for a reason, because I've interviewed so many people. But where you are and what you achieved, with all of that coming to you all of the same time, with a breath. And that is a powerful story. And I want to make sure that everyone that is in all of those countries that are following us, they come and follow you and get a chance to be a part of your world, so that you can teach them now how those process by which you come out. And I want you to be able to teach them and about the 15 minutes and the all the different things that they use. But for me, it was my meditation that allowed me to begin to gain mastery of my thoughts. There's a principle that says, take no thought saying. You say it within yourself, that I'm going to take it. I remember, Ben, I was telling people I was called upon to come to a prison to teach there one time. And I looked at all these big guys, bigger than me, and I stood up in front of them and said, "You guys are all weak because you couldn't control your thoughts. That's why you're here." And, and they kept staring at me and looking at me. And then I began to explain to them what I meant by that. And every one of those guys, all of the biggest ones, they came and hugged me and said, "Guys, thank you so much. Now I have to learn how to control my thoughts and become the master of my thoughts." And I didn't, and it controlled me, and it caused me to have 50 years, 20 years, life sentences. And so many people, Ben, if they don't understand this, they are still in prison like those guys in their situations for 5 years, 20 years, 50 years. And so because they have they haven't learned how to master their thoughts. And I just want to thank you so much, sir, from the bottom of my being, for you to come here and educate me as well as all the people at Threads of Enlightenment. And Ben, I'm going to call on you again. I know we have a time limit, but I want to call on you again, because this is it, guys. This is how we come out and we get to where we want to be by becoming masters of our thoughts. And Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. It's been a real honor and privilege to speak with you today.
Man, thank you. Ben, everyone who's listening to this podcast, we hope to continually help you to learn how to embrace moments of darkness, because it is in the darkness that we learn how to develop and use our abilities to truly see those parts of ourselves often invisible to us in the light. It becomes your responsibility to navigate through all of your trials, to find out who you truly are and begin your journey to loving yourself, which is possibly one of the most difficult things you will ever do in your life. To love yourself and to find the real you. But always remember to enjoy the journey. Thank you for coming by. Please subscribe. And if you can support us financially, we deeply appreciate it.